Berlin, November 9th, 1989. East Germans mob the border checkpoints that divide communist East Berlin from the West, scarcely believing what they've heard. That for the first time in 30 years, they may be free to travel to the other side. Colonel Harold Jaeger of the East German Border Guard is faced with a momentous decision.
We had no orders from our superiors. And suddenly we saw how helpless we were when faced by the will of the population. When the will of the people is stronger than the power of the state, then something is wrong. All I could do was open the barrier and let the people go.
The breach in the wall marks the final failure of the communist ideal so many had once believed in. For hospital worker Mike Fronell, it's a dream come true.
I wanted to really savor the moment. I looked down, and I took one step, and then another, and I was over it. I was about that much over the white line, and suddenly it was too much. That wall. I had overcome this monster, this snake of a wall.
The demise of the Berlin Wall brings liberation. All over the communist world, after years of resigned acceptance, millions of people have finally stood up. Back in the 1970s, the Soviet system was at the height of its power. Each year, on the anniversary of the October Revolution, communists celebrated an idea still expected to transform the world. Soviet television interviewed Nina Matova as a hero of socialist labor.
Ведь партия осуществляет руководящую роль.
We marched closest to the mausoleum, so proud because our region and our factory were always considered the best. We paraded our ball bearings. The watch factory showed their new watches. Each factory displayed their achievements. We were so proud our country was so powerful. We felt like one beating heart.
The communist world stretched from the Pacific in the east to the heart of Europe. Poles, Czechs, Romanians, and East Germans were all seen as part of the same great family. In Berlin, Mike Fronell carried the banner for the district of Lichtenberg.
Everybody was marching in the same direction, towards the sun. If I was tired or depressed, those songs gave me a lift. They gave me a real push.
The future lay onwards and upwards, powered by the brotherhood of socialism. A socialist Superman was creating a better world, all in the name of Lenin. This fantastic vision inspired new generations of school children.
We were everything. We had the best tractors, the best schools. Everything was the best here. We never had any doubts.
Мы пионеры, юные ленинцы. По-ленински жить и трудиться – наша большая мечта.
For Dasha Kubova, the Russian fairy tale about an all-knowing king who could see into every home was very real.
I believe Brezhnev also sent his head around the city. I could see his head there instead of the king's. Of course I loved him. I couldn't help loving him. He was our king. Every night I sat up in my bed half asleep with my curtains open and I saluted Brezhnev. I imagined his head was somewhere near looking at me. And I saluted so he'd know good people lived here.
The state planned for everything. People's lives were mapped out for them in a system that claimed to provide the care and stability that capitalism never could.
Our state was an example for the whole world. No unemployment, free healthcare and free schooling. Everything was organized, for everyone down to the youngest child. It was all planned in advance, even how many bearings would be sent to which factory.
And by the 1970s, the central planners were attempting to produce everything a modern consumer might demand.
Jako Aleníka v říši divů se budete cítit v obchodních domech Prior. Z nepřeberné nabídky zboží našeho trhu se vám zatočí hlava.
Wendig. Schnell. Ausdauernd und robust. Ihr zuverlässiger Begleiter, der neue Trabant 601.
As a skilled worker in one of Czechoslovakia's biggest factories, Petr Miller's standard of living was rising.
I knew that they had Mercedes in the West. Yes, it's a great car, but they're both cars and they both get you from A to B.
Party control of all newspapers and television meant people heard only the good news, the propaganda of success.
Za 25 let socialistického zemědělství se zvýšila výroba obilí o 70%.
Decisions were made for you somewhere else. The party newspaper told you what to think. All we could do was chat over a beer, and we were far more interested in sport.
It was a world of mass illusion, in which the individual was part of the whole, and the whole part of the individual.
There I am, below the letter E. I remember how terrified we were to get it right, not to put up the wrong card, because Ceausescu was there in front of us. And for him, everything had to be perfect.
When Romania's President Ceausescu was shown visiting markets, Mihai Radu knew the displays of food had little to do with real life.
The truth is that the shops didn't even have 1/100th of what we used to see on TV. There was little food. No meat, butter, milk, no cheese.
Across the Soviet bloc, Communist economic planning wasn't delivering. Standing in line became a way of life.
Ale powinno być trochę lepiej. Bo wie pan, żona idzie w kolejkę, stoi, cholera nie ma, ty kupisz te parę deko wędliny, nie ma. Tyle u nas w Polsce świnie hodują, u nas nie można kupić.
My good fortune was that my grandparents were still alive. I remember my grandfather would take a little stool down to the shop, where he would sit all night until the shop opened the next morning. That was when the Romanian proverb was coined, if you don't have a granny, you better buy one.
People spent up to 5 hours a day in line. The wait for an apartment was 15 years. But the party still tried to persuade them that life was far worse in the capitalist West.
I remember the films we saw, like Oliver. That was exploitation. I was so shocked.
Natasha Kuznetsova, growing up in southern Russia, believed what she saw on the screen.
I cried. I was sorry for that Oliver. What a nightmare his life was. I thought they still lived like that in the West.
Please, sir, I want some more.
In the East, they were told that the Iron Curtain that divided the continent was there to protect socialism from the evil influence of the West. But by the late 1970s, barbed wire and dogs could no longer shield them from the anarchic din of Western culture.
I got to know the West through music, though I didn't understand a word. I imagined these people dancing and smiling. You couldn't hide the freedom in that music.
Anything from the West, records, soap, clothing, became a prized item on the black market.
I wanted blue jeans. I'd seen them on someone. All I had to do was find the money. 2 months' salary. An amazing sum.
But occasionally, the authorities made an effort to cater to the tastes of the new generation.
Было все на белом свете, люди издавна повторяются. Было, есть и снова будет так.
Будет так, будет так, будет так, будет так. Было, есть и снова будет так.
Будет так.
Будет так.
Будет так.
Будет так.
Было, есть и снова будет так.
But whatever people might want and think, it was dangerous to speak up. The state's tentacles reached into every area of life. Telephones were bugged. Hotel rooms were filmed. Idle talk could lead to arrest on the street. Though the worst days of the Stalinist terror were over, fear, not ideology, still kept people in check. The secret police held millions of files on ordinary citizens, full of information supplied by a huge network of paid informers.
I traveled by train a lot. People were always grumbling about Ceausescu or living conditions. But I preferred to stand in the corridor or pretend that I was sleeping. I was scared. Why should I take a risk? Nobody knew who might be an informer.
One of those informers was Dietmar Passenheim, who traveled the East German railways for the police.
I would go onto the platform before the train rolled in. I just looked around to see what sort of people were boarding the train, and I'd pick out who to go and sit with. In our training, we had been taught how to recognize people. The decadent citizens were often young. Perhaps they wore jeans. Every Westerner had to be watched. He was an enemy, and we had to fight him.
A secret police training film showed how to spot the danger signs when a young person grew infatuated with the West.
Durch den sich bei ihr im Laufe der Jahre immer extremer herausbildenden Hang zum luxuriösen Leben nach westlichem Vorbild wurde ihre ideologische Grundposition später immer mehr aufgeweicht.
In Moscow, Natasha Kuznetsova was drawn to anything and anyone Western.
There was only one disco in Moscow. We weren't allowed in. You could only go with a foreigner.
She soon got herself into trouble.
When we got there, I was arrested. They forced me to sign a document admitting to the role they wanted to give me, a hard currency prostitute.
The penalties were high for people who challenged system. When the young Berliner Mike Fronel distributed dissident leaflets, he ended up in a secret police prison.
They knew quite a lot about me. They knew more than I thought. They showed me photographs. They had photographed me in secret. It was unbelievable. For the first 7 months, I was in solitary. They dredged up your deepest secrets. There was nothing left of you. Nothing. You were only a number.
In Poland, the opposition to Soviet domination and the socialist idea was more widespread and deeply rooted than anywhere else. People still clung to another set of beliefs. The election of a Polish pope and his triumphant journey back to Poland in 1979 gave the Poles a new confidence in their Roman Catholic faith and in themselves.
I just fell to my knees. This would change everything. Now life would improve. This Pole would bring us salvation. Our life was going to be different.
Poles were told they lived in a workers' state, but the workers felt ignored and exploited, and any attempt to improve conditions was ruthlessly put down. The discontent was greatest in the port of Gdansk. In 1980, a year after the Pope's visit, the shipyard went on strike. Enrique Krzewinowicz was a streetcar driver on the line outside the gate.
We knew something was up in the shipyards, so I stopped my number 15 in front of the opera. I blocked the 15s, the 13s and the 2s. I brought all the traffic in the center of Gdansk to a halt.
With the city at a standstill, the strikers gathered in the shipyard and issued 21 demands. Many were a direct challenge to the Communist Party's claim to represent the workers.
Co uważa pan za jedno z najgłówniejszych waszych postulatów?
Znaczy wybrać wolne związki nieuzależnione są od partii, od rządu. Wówczas wszystkie problemy klasy robotniczej będą rozwiązane.
The strikers and their supporters prayed that the army wouldn't be sent in.
Ojcze nasz, któryś jest w niebie, święć się imię, a nas złego.
People were born anew in the yards. We all came together. I didn't go to confession because I had nothing to confess. That's how people took it. And those masses also meant that we weren't scared.
With strikes spreading all over Poland, a government minister arrived in the shipyard for talks. The strikers listened in over loudspeakers. Enrique Krzewinost and her fellow negotiators could now confront the party leaders face to face.
Świadczam, że aparat partyjny nie ma żadnych przywilejów. Nie ma inaczej dodatków rodzinnych, tak jak całe społeczeństwo.
Ale tu nie ma co sprawdzać, przecież to jest normalne. Wojsko milicja mają swoje kantyny i zaopatrują się na bieżąco.
Ja mówię o aparacie partyjnym.
No tak. I to też przecież macie swoje, prawda, stołówki, inne rzeczy i udostępnione wszystko.
Takie jak w każdym zakładzie stołówki.
Ale nic podobnego.
Ale ja tu nie widzę po prostu...
Muszę powiedzieć, że to tak wyglądało trochę, jakby mi skrzydła.
Suddenly I felt I'd grown wings. It wasn't that people liked what I said, but at last I could say what I wanted.
To, co my chcemy.
The party caved in. The workers were allowed to form the first independent, non-communist trade union in the Soviet Empire. Led by shipyard electrician Lech Walesa, they'd taken on the full might of the communist state and won.
Wszyscy bierzemy odpowiedzialność, nie ja sam, ale wszyscy razem to jest siła, to jest moc i my to zrobimy. Mamy już swoją prasę. Solidarność będzie naszym pismem, które będzie się samo bez żadnych cenzur ukazywała. Będziemy pisali to, co chcemy.
Within weeks, 10 million Poles had joined the new union. Terrified that solidarity was a dangerous virus that would spread to their own people, other communist governments tried to discredit it as a subversive movement encouraged by the West.
Místem určení tohoto kontrabandu, ukrývaného stejně důmyslně jako například drogy, je Československo a Polsko.
Border guards like Harold Jaeger in East Berlin were put on alert.
Not only was money brought over, but printing presses and large amounts of paper. If we discovered things like that, people were arrested. To us, solidarity meant counter-revolution. Solidarity called for strikes against socialism in Poland. We believed that to strike against your own state was to strike against yourself.
Soviet workers accused their Polish brothers.
Эти профсоюзные органы в Польше в настоящий момент призывают к борьбе за власть, за реставрацию капитализма в Польше.
The pressure on the Poles was turned up when the Soviets held maneuvers just a few miles from Gdansk. The clear message to the Polish party leader General Jaruzelski was that the Red Army would intervene if the Poles failed to put their own house in order.
Obywatelki I obywatele Polskiej Rzeczypospolitej Ludowej.
In December 1981, just 16 months after the Gdansk Agreement, the general banned solidarity and declared martial law. Faced by the full might of the army and police, the unarmed trade union kept up resistance for as long as it could. Thousands of Solidarity leaders were rounded up and arrested. The police soon came for Enrique Krzewinost.
I knew they'd come for me. I was so afraid. 4 of them burst in and started to kick me around like a ball because I resisted. When one of them saw I was pregnant, it made no difference. I was shouting and they were screaming. They beat me up. They left me bleeding on the floor.
Zostawili mnie w krwotoku.
Enrica lost her baby and any chance of having children. The Soviet leaders still held ultimate control in their hands, but their grasp was faltering. Three general secretaries were buried in quick succession. A leader from a new generation took over, and Mikhail Gorbachev seemed to understand the frustrations of the people on the streets.
Поэтому вот давайте двигать сильнее страну, экономику. Будем двигать экономику, будет крепкая оборона и будем продолжать рост материального благосостояния. Жилье будем, да, все будем делать.
Держитесь ближе к народу, мы не готовы.
Ну куда же ближе? Спасибо. Кубанский хлеб я знаю, что...
He was a leader with a new style, who declared the socialist world could only be transformed with the full participation of the people.
Хотим, чтобы так у нас шло в стране, чтобы люди наши активно принимали участие во всех делах, которые касаются и коллектива, и страны.
A new policy of openness, or glasnost, allowed Soviets to read books and see films that had been censored previously. Director Indar Shangalai had foreseen the collapse of the whole Soviet system in a comedy about a publishing house that had come to a halt.
Ты возьмешь у Бори, когда он прочтет. На, Боря, твой. Что это? Положи туда. Ходи, ходи. Нет, пусть у меня будет. После тебя я читаю. Хорошо. Конем ходи. Не подсказывай. Ребята, игра на интерес, ребят.
And then the building begins to collapse. You'll see it here. Because the system itself was collapsing. We could not go on in that state of paralysis. I was very lucky. Gorbachev saw the film and they told me later he liked it very much. He said it caught the tragedy of our situation perfectly. He said we have to do something before the roof falls in.
Television viewers were transfixed by programs which told for the first time how people really lived.
Настолько сел у нас грибок, видите, это еще сравнительно очень хорошо. А канализация у нас в туалете может замерзнуть, так как у нас на кухне не отопляется, там нужно топить печку. А печи нет, топят. Они вот-вот рухнут, вот печка. Замазываем, подмазываем. Говорят, что у нас еще более-менее нормальные условия, живут хуже.
Yevgeny Mikhaev, a Moscow fishmonger, was taken aback by all this frankness.
It really was a shock. In the past, we'd always told jokes among ourselves, and we laughed about all the things that were wrong and we didn't like. But we did it among friends, and now suddenly here it all was on TV.
Further Gorbachev reforms began challenging the state's total control over the economy. Yevgeny Mikhaev, who for 20 years had worked in this large state-run food shop, embraced the opportunities Gorbachev presented.
Gorbachev said, "Come on, wake up, make some money, organize your own cooperatives." It was good. I even set up my own little business. I liked it because I was responsible. I was feeding my family myself. I was free of the state. I was independent.
But in many places, political freedom was the primary goal. All across the Soviet Union, long-suppressed nationalism burst into the open. Soon the Gorbachev revolution was spinning out of control. In Eastern Europe, the party had been kept in power by Moscow's past willingness to send in the tanks. When Gorbachev removed that threat, the first cracks appeared. In Hungary, new leaders began to dismantle the old political system, even allowing people to take down sections of the Iron Curtain. In Poland, Solidarity, whose popular support had never been destroyed, forced the government to hold free elections. They swept to power. But a cluster of old-style regimes from Romania to East Germany still seemed firmly in charge. In Berlin, the East German leadership celebrated 40 years of communism as if nothing had changed. Most East Germans, like Barbara Reinke, knew differently.
People were quieter. Previously, you would always celebrate the 7th of October, and you'd be forced to be cheerful. But that day, there was something in the air.
The crowds chanted for the visiting Gorbachev, not for their own die-hard leaders.
Gorbachev was our great hope. Even down here in my street, someone had sprayed Gorbachev on the wall. We had such hopes of him.
Just a couple of blocks from the official pageantry, a counter-demonstration was broken up by the police.
In the Schönhauser Allee, people were being beaten. Plainclothes police took truncheons out of their pockets and beat up those youngsters. I thought, finally, I can do something. I can stand up and support these people. I don't have to sit around at home. Now I can do something.
Despite the police tactics that night, the demonstration spread. People who for years had passively accepted the status quo felt brave enough to take a stand. And with the opposition swelling, the party was driven into making hurried concessions.
Just after 7 p.m., I was having my dinner in our canteen. We had a black and white television, and I watched the press conference on it.
The party had decided to let people travel to the West, but the spokesman failed to announce that the visas needed would not be issued until the next morning.
Das tritt nach meiner Kenntnis ist das sofort. Unverzüglich. When he turned the bit of paper and said something like, as I understand it, immediately, I thought, immediately? That's impossible. He's talking nonsense.
Here at home, I screamed so loud, even though I was all alone. I screamed, the wall is open.
As thousands made their way to the West, Barbara Reinke set out for the Brandenburg Gate. On a night of confusion, she found herself blocked by a line of border guards.
Ich bitte Sie. An wen denn? Wer ist zuständig, bitte? Zeigen Sie mir den, wenn ich mich an... Ja, wissen Sie, wie lange wir gewartet haben?
I became terribly frightened and thought they'd tricked us again.
Ich kann nicht mehr! Ich habe mir einmal in meinem Leben gewünscht, durch dieses Brandenburger Tor zu gehen. Und zwar in den anderen Teil zu gucken. Ich war noch nie da drüben.
Ich fühlte mich wirklich mit ihm als ein Block stehen.
I felt he was a block.
Nicht vorbei lassen, uns nie mehr
I
mit
thought,
uns stellen.
never again will someone say, you can't go through here. You're not allowed to go there. You're not allowed to do that. No more. I'm going through.
Later that night, Barbel achieved her ambition. Both East and West Berlin exploded in joy.
Das war für mich so unfassbar. Ich muss es ehrlich sagen, mein Mann hatte keine Lust mehr noch mitzukommen. Ich sage, lass uns einmal an so einem historischen Tag einmal mit dabei sein.
Die hat mich angerufen, nach der... Das ist ein wunderschöner Tag.
We talked later that night. Someone said, that's it. That's the end of the GDR.
Die Verabschiedung der DDR.
A Czech underground cartoon celebrated the revolutions. Poles, Hungarians, and East Germans had broken free. Now the Czechs tried to join them. Inspired by dissident playwright Václav Havel, huge crowds took over the capital every evening.
Zdravím jménem občanského fóra i všechny občany, kteří nejsou zde na pražském Václavském náměstí a sledují nás prostřednictvím televize.
Petr Miller z ČKD.
After a chance meeting with Havel, the factory worker Petr Miller became the workers' representative in negotiations with the government.
We were amazed at the reaction of our opponents at meetings. Here was someone who had all that power at his disposal and could control everything. Suddenly this man was sitting opposite you. He was very small, and he didn't have an idea.
The Czech party leadership, without the threat of the Red Army to back them up, was floundering.
Sometimes even Havel didn't know what to do. When we got back, we'd locked the door and burst into hysterical laughter.
In 2 weeks, 40 years of communist rule was swept away.
Československá televize oznámila, že všichni členové předsednictva UVKSČ dávají své funkce k dispozici.
It was called the Velvet Revolution. But in Romania, nothing had changed. That winter, life was made up of desperate shortages, with daily power cuts and temperatures well below freezing. In the same week as the revolution in Prague, Nicolae Ceausescu held a party congress. The faithful greeted him as they always did, and he rewarded them with a 6-hour speech.
The Communist Party and all the people of Romania are the same.
They responded with 67 standing ovations. No mention was made of the fall of the Berlin Wall. The Romanian press had never even reported it.
There was no information about what was going on in Eastern Europe. But here in Timișoara, we had a trump card. Through Yugoslav TV, we had news about the outside world.
Emboldened by what they knew had happened in Berlin and Prague, the people of Timișoara in western Romania were the first to dare to protest. Ian Savu, who worked in a local soap factory, found himself leading a rebellion.
For the first time in my life, I felt free. All over the place were the signs of the communist regime. Long live the Communist Party. Long live Comrade Ceausescu, the beloved leader. That day, we destroyed all those symbols of the party and Ceausescu.
Thousands gathered in the main square. Ian and Leontina Bencioi heard the demonstration outside.
Când a văzut că eu sunt așa hotărât să nu stau nici să termine mâncarea.
When she saw that I was determined to go out and not even finish the second course, she left the potatoes in the pot and decided to come with me.
As the march approached the bridge into the center of town, it became clear Ceausescu was not going to give in like his German and Czech comrades.
There were troops with their weapons aimed at us. When the group approached, they opened fire without any warning. People screamed in pain. My wife fell, clinging to my arm.
Au lovit-o cu un gloț în spate, exact prin inimă.
She was hit by one bullet in the back, straight through the heart. I thought she was still alive, but she died right there on the spot.
The slaughter went on as troops surrounded the city, but the defiance continued.
People realized there was no way back, and even if they killed us, others would carry on the fight.
In the capital, Bucharest, stories of the Timișoara uprising spread quickly. Ceausescu's forces hastily organized a rally so he could demonstrate his control.
Aceste mari manifestări populare din București, considerând aceasta ca o...
But the crowd erupted in protest. The government television broadcast was abruptly cut. That night, Bucharest exploded. Hundreds were killed. But the people kept coming, and when the army deserted him, Ceausescu and his wife fled.
Everyone had tears in their eyes. It was so emotional. That week meant I hadn't lived for nothing.
When the Ceausescus were caught, there was no mercy. With the televised executions of Ceausescu and his wife, an era of repression in Eastern Europe had come to an end. In the country where it had all begun, the Communist Party still held power. But Gorbachev's reforms had shaken the old certainties. Loyal party members at Moscow's first ball-bearing factory were bewildered by the changes, at home and abroad.
I felt the ground slipping from under my feet. I cried tears of despair. How could this be happening? Maybe we communists did make mistakes. I'll even agree to that. But did they need to ruin everything? Not like that. It was our history.
A cartoon of the time told how destructive communism had been in the past, and how Gorbachev's attempts to reform the system had just brought disasters, economic breakdown, and civil war.
Заявляем, чрезвычайное положение в отдельных местностях СССР на срок 6 месяцев.
With Gorbachev threatening everything they believed in, communist hardliners in the army and the KGB mounted a preemptive strike. Gorbachev was held prisoner as they sought to reimpose the old order. Sergei Evdokimov led the tank brigade sent to the Russian parliament.
We saw people standing at bus stops, going to work. Their reaction varied. Some cried, some waved, some prayed. We had no idea what was going on, only that the commander had ordered us to Moscow.
But the leaders of the coup had miscalculated. One of a new breed of radical politicians, Boris Yeltsin, called on the people to fight back.
Имеем дело с правым реакционным антиконституционным переворотом.
The White House, where Yeltsin presided over the Russian parliament, became the center of resistance.
I realized I had to do something. All those new freedoms were at risk. We wouldn't be able to travel. Once again, we'd be behind an iron curtain. They wanted to break me again. But once you've tasted freedom, you can't do without it.
People began telling us what was going on, agitating, threatening us, crying and asking the soldiers, "Have you come to kill us?"
The troops were uncertain what to do. Major Evdokimov, filmed on his tank, was contacted by Yeltsin's deputy.
He said, "The people who sent you are criminals." Then he asked, "Will you help us?" That was his key phrase. I knew what he meant. Would we defend Yeltsin's White House? I said, "Yes, I will."
Unwilling to turn their guns on their own people, the young soldiers were the first to disobey their commanders. The coup began to crumble.
"Are you ready to die?" I asked one, and he smiled and said yes. I stroked one, I kissed another. I embraced them as I went along. I began crying. The tears had begun earlier. There's a photo of me.
For 2 nights, the defenders waited for an attack that never came. The hardliners who'd led the coup had failed. And as they were swept away, they took Gorbachev and the whole Communist Party with them. Russia had a new hero in Boris Yeltsin. And for the first time in 70 years, the Russian national flag was unfurled at the Kremlin. All over the Soviet Union, people tore down the symbols of an ideology that had shaped so much of the 20th century. The people were asked to put their faith in new gods, democracy and capitalism.